Welcome back. So, is there a job that has less certainty than coaching in professional sports? I mean, there's quarterback in football, I would say kicker in football, a lot of insecurity around that as well. And if you're a starting pitcher, you're a couple of bad starts away from maybe being a reliever, depends on the pitcher. But getting to hockey terms really is, I mean, starting goaltender, there's always going to be that pressure depending on what team you're with, but coach. Head coach, really treated like they're expendable and they're interchangeable, and it's something that has existed since before I was watching hockey. I've got articles from 1980 on how coaches are hired to be fired. So that's where we're at, and we've got a bunch of new coaches coming into this season who you would think don't have any pressure. So you got Jim Montgomery in Boston. Really hope he does well, especially after the way things ended for him in Dallas. Luke Richardson in Chicago finally getting a shot at a head coaching job. I honestly hope he does well. The good news is there's not a lot of pressure for winning for him in Chicago. This is a team that's going through a rebuild. I think he'll be measured by how well young players develop and seeing players get to that next level. Pete DeBoer, brought on by Dallas. In essence, they're trying to create more goals. This is the plan in Dallas, and we'll see how well it goes for them. Paul Maurice in Florida. A bit of a surprise with Paul Maurice. I'd kind of expected Andrew Burnett to be brought back, but they're going with a more veteran voice behind the bench, and who knows? Maybe Maurice in Florida, maybe it is what they need to get over the hump and win their first Stanley Cup, or at the very least get to maybe a Final Four appearance. John Tortorella in Philly. We're all salivating over what could happen with John Tortorella in Philly, aren't we? It feels like it's a marriage made in heaven. Like we look at Tortorella and this Flyers team, we think, oh boy, there could be some really great post game interviews, and there likely will be. But there's no pressure on Tortorella. I don't think. I don't think he's going to be a short term coach. At the very least, he'll make it through that 1 year. We'll see next summer where things are at. David Quinn in San Jose, bit of a surprise with him being picked up, but while his time with the Rangers wasn't entirely successful, sometimes a coach changing jobs, changing cities, can make a huge difference. Bruce Cassidy in Vegas looks like the most obvious improvement behind the bench, and I say that because I'm a big Bruce Cassidy fan. There are those, though, that will point out that towards the end of his time in Boston, it did seem like there were certain players that were kind of tired of the coach, but that does happen, and some of the coaches on this side of the board, there may be players that are tired of those coaches as well. And then, of course, with the Islanders, Lane Lambert brought in. Lane Lambert replacing Barry Trotz. Matthew Barzell today saying that he has nothing bad to say about Barry Trotz, but having a new voice in the locker room could be exactly what the doctor ordered. And Derek Lalonde, hired by the Detroit Red Wings, and the plan is to go forward with him. Detroit's looking to get better this year. I don't think there's any pressure on him necessarily where his job would be in any kind of danger. I think all the new coaches should be just fine. So the returning coaches is where you're looking for guys who might have their jobs in danger. So what I've done is I've arranged them from the most recent hire to the one that was hired the longest time back. I'm wearing Boston because there's very little chance Jim Montgomery's the first coach who gets fired this year. Jay Woodcroft, he is in good shape to stick around as the Oilers coach for at least this season. And I mean at least meaning that if the Oilers drop back, if the Oilers ended up struggling to make the playoffs or just outside the playoff picture, I don't think Woodcroft's job would be in danger. His hiring date of February 10th, 2022, I think he will be kept around no matter what. He had a very good run at the end of the season, and he reached the Final Four. So if Edmonton has any struggles, I don't think they'll look to make a change behind the bench. Marty St. Louis in Montreal. No pressure on Marty St. Louis, hired only a day before Jay Woodcroft. And much like Woodcroft, they were both basically your interim coaches that became full-time coaches, right? Anyways, for St. Louis, the offense should be there for Montreal, and as long as we still see Caulfield making those next steps, and as long as their young forwards continue to commit to their own, I think St. Louis' job's really safe as well. Montreal not expected to be in the playoffs. So again, much like Chicago here with Luke Richardson, the success behind the bench for Marty St. Louis will be measured by how well these young players are playing and any bounce backs we see from veterans. Then in Vancouver, you have the fascinating case of Bruce Boudreau on a 1-year contract, hired December 5th of 2021, and deciding to come back for this season. And it feels like he's going to get the full year, and if he struggles or if the Canucks struggle, we may see a change being made, but I'd be very surprised if it happens. That being said, there's a lot of pressure in the market. So if the Canucks are in trouble, there could be pressure in the market that suddenly says, "Hey, Boudreau worked for 1 year, not so much this year." But I really do like Boudreau. It's the reason that I'm kind of bullish on the Canucks this year, because I think with Boudreau behind the bench and with the team staying relatively intact from last season, I think they should be able to pick up where they left off. I'm at least hopeful they pick up where they left off. That second half of the season was pretty strong for them. So I don't think Boudreau's in trouble. Andre Tourigny, much the same thing, hired July 1st of 2021 by Arizona. The Coyotes know where they're at. They know what they're doing. And so Tourigny is basically, he's there to guide the ship. And again, he is another one of those coaches that will likely be measured by how well the young kids come along, by how well things gel on the ice. I think the fact that the Arizona Coyotes won as many games as they did last year shows what a strong coach he is. Then you got Dave Haxtell in Seattle. June 24th of 2021, he was hired. I do wonder if the Seattle Kraken get off to a rough start this year. Let's say they win 2 of their first 15. That kind of a start, do they look to make a change behind the bench? I think of the coaches I've talked about, Haxtell might be the first one that I could see if Seattle gets off to a really brutal start being let go behind the bench. And then it's a matter of who would Seattle bring in to replace him. And if it was Barry Trotz, how much of a meltdown would everybody have in Winnipeg? But anyways, just throwing that out there. But yeah, Haxtell, I would think might have some heat on him in the event that it's a slow start for the Seattle team. The New York Rangers, Gerard Gallant, he is safe. June 16th of 2021, he was hired by the Rangers. Had a fantastic season. The Rangers exceeded expectations both in the regular season and the postseason. Igor Shesterkin is a star. There's so many players who've played well under Gerard Gallant, and I think his job's safe for quite a while. I think it'd be a couple of years before we'd look at any kind of a change for the Rangers behind the bench. Then you got Brad Larson in Columbus, hired June 10th of 2021. I don't think Larson's in any danger either, and I say that even though Columbus making changes, and those changes are made with the idea that, hey, we want to get back in the playoffs. I don't think Larson's job's in any kind of danger. Then you get to Don Granato with the Sabres, March 17th of 2021. The players seem to like Granato. The team likes Granato. There's not a playoff expectation for Buffalo this year, so I don't know how much stress there would be on Don Granato regarding his job if Buffalo goes into some kind of a tailspin, unless it's like 2 wins in 20 games. Something awful like that. I don't think we'll see any problems. And I don't think we'll see a change behind the bench. Daryl Sutter, hired March 4th of 2021 by the Flames. Famously towards Sutter's end of his time running the bench for the LA Kings. Yeah, the Kings weren't a big fan of Daryl Sutter and his coaching style. But while his coaching style does have an expiration date, I don't think we're near that for Calgary. And as long as Calgary is, I would say, top 2 or top 3 in that division, Sutter's not going anywhere. So in the event that we would see a player have some kind of a rift with Daryl Sutter and his coaching style, I would think the player would be the one to go, not the coach. So for Daryl Sutter, I think he's got at least another year, probably a couple if he wants to stick around, at least. I'm saying that in worst case, if Calgary's awful this year, I don't think it necessarily costs him his job. Peter Laviolette might be an interesting one. So September 15th of 2020, he was hired by the Capitals. Now, there are some predicting the Capitals are going to fall out of the playoffs. If the Capitals fall out of the playoffs, and you look at how Ovechkin's getting older and all this fun stuff, would the team say, all right, well, we don't have Backstrom, we're looking at an aging core, it's understandable, or would they look to make a change behind the bench? And I don't really have an answer. So if the Caps get off to a slow start, there may be those that would look at Laviolette. And in the event that Peter Laviolette, let's just go that far and say if Laviolette became available as a coach, I think there would be a lot of teams that would be interested in his services. So I'm not saying the Washington necessarily gets rid of him. I'm saying I'm about 50-50 if they have a slow start. Lindy Ruff, July 9th of 2020. New Jersey still has Lindy Ruff behind the bench. They made a lot of changes after last season was a complete disaster. Did not change the head coach. That being said, I would be very surprised if Lindy Ruff's not on the hot seat. If the New Jersey Devils get off to a brutal start this year, that could very well cost Lindy Ruff his job. And then we can have the debate about whether or not it would be Lindy Ruff's fault. But yeah, there's certainly some Devils fans that are not big Lindy Ruff fans. I defended him plenty when Dallas fired him many years back. but I do understand why people in New Jersey aren't enamored with Lindy Ruff at this point. Dean Evison, hired February 14th of 2020 by the Minnesota Wild. I don't think he's in any danger either. The thing is, there's a lot of coaches that were hired in 2020 and beyond. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 coaches that have been with the team since before 2019, before 2020. So that's the kind of job security you're looking at if you're a head coach. You could just go through and say, I think all these guys are going to be gone within the next 3 years, and you get probably at least half of them right. People are like, hey, that's really smart. So half of these guys will be gone in 3 years. There you go. Mark it. But yeah, Dean Evison, a very popular coach, has the best facial expressions of any coach in the NHL, and I enjoy his coaching. I enjoy the fact that he takes chances. That he's like, well, let's see, there's 15 minutes left in the game. We're down by 6. If I pull the goalie now, we get a goal every couple of minutes, we'll be fine. And I just love the fact that he does think outside the box. So, Dean Evison, I would think, is relatively safe. The one thing is, Bill Guerin's got a team that's got a salary cap problem. They're going to have even more of a salary cap problem next year due to those buyouts. They have even $2 million less in cap space, I think it is, next year than they have this year because of the buyouts. So I don't know that Evison would be the one that gets blamed for that if Minnesota falls out. But it's the easiest move a GM can make, which is to say, okay, well, I'm going to have to make a change behind the bench. So it can be the easiest move for a GM to make. We'll see if that move gets made. John Hines, hired January 7th of 2020. If Nashville gets off to a slow start, I could see Hines being on the hot seat as well. The Central Division, there's a lot of teams that are in what we might call the mushy middle. They could be good. They could be outside the playoffs. They could be middling. And so Nashville's one of those teams that they're definitely in that area where they could be as high as 2nd or 3rd in the division. They could be as low as 6th. And I say 6th because it's a division with Arizona and Chicago, and they're not letting go of 7th and 8th spot, not in all likelihood. So Hines will be one to keep an eye on. Then you get to Sheldon Keefe. Sheldon Keefe, I would expect a lot of people to say he's the one that's on the hot seat. November 20th of 2019. This is where you get into something Brian Burke used to say. A general manager gets to hire one coach. And then after that, they look to replace the general manager. So if Toronto gets off to a rough start, would Kyle Dubas be allowed to make a change behind the bench, or would the Toronto Maple Leafs decide to make a change in the GM's office? And that's really something that I'd be interested to see what would happen there. That being said, I think Toronto should be fine this year. But again, Keefe's one that if they get off to a slow start, we'll see if there's changes made in the Toronto organization. Dallas Eakins, hired June 17th of 2019 by the Ducks. They picked up the they picked up the option on his contract in the offseason. Eakins is sticking around at least through this season. I'll be interested to see if when Pat Verbeek looks at his team and says, I think we're now a playoff team, whether Eakins is going to be the coach or if there's going to be a change. It's one thing I looked at with Detroit where it feels like the expectation's gone up, so Detroit makes a change behind the bench. And we'll see if that happens with Anaheim as well. For Ottawa, DJ Smith, I think, has some pressure on him. Hired May 23rd of 2019. Ottawa, a lot of hype. I've done a lot of videos on Ottawa. I do think that if Ottawa gets off to a rough start, look at last year, October and November. Absolutely brutal record at the end of November for Ottawa. They cannot afford to have that again. So if around mid-November, this is a team that's sputtering and they don't look like they're going to be a playoff team, Pierre Dorion may very well look to make a change there. Todd McClellan in LA, April 16th of 2019, he was hired. Interestingly enough, through the first couple of weeks of last season, there were a lot of Kings fans, I saw it again in the comments, who were saying, McClellan's not good enough, we need to make a change behind the bench. What's McClellan doing? He's messing up the lines, he's messing up everything. And then they ended up turning it around, making the playoffs, which I think has bought him at least a year behind the bench. If they miss the playoffs, maybe they make a change next summer, but I really don't think there's any danger for his job being on the line this season. The Kings were kind of ahead of schedule in making the playoffs this past year. So if there's some kind of a bit of a fallback, I don't know that necessarily impacts McClellan's coaching job. Craig Berube is safe. We're getting into the coaches that are pretty safe here. November 19th of 2018, hired by the Blues. They win the Stanley Cup. I think Berube and Doug Armstrong have a really strong relationship. I don't think Craig Berube's going anywhere. I would be shocked if the St. Louis Blues decide to make a change behind the bench. Even if St. Louis has a rough season, I don't think it happens. Carolina, Rod Brind'Amour, hired May 18th of 2018. Also, I perceive him as being safe. I really don't see any reason to think that anything could happen with Rod Brind'Amour. Again, excellent relationship with the fans, with the team, and just in general. I think Rod Brind'Amour is there until he decides he doesn't want to be there anymore. And to me, it looks like I think there's a greater likelihood of Rod Brind'Amour saying, you know what, I'm just going to go out on the ice and do this myself, and open up his suit jacket to reveal he's wearing a jersey underneath. He's Superman. Go out on the ice and get himself a couple of goals. And then of the NHL going, actually, he's still an active player. He didn't actually retire. So there. Brind'Amour, pretty safe. So's Bednar. I mean, Jared Bednar just won a cup ring. He's hired August 25th of 2016 by Colorado. He's been through the worst with Colorado. Now he's experienced the best. There is no chance he's losing his job. Now, an interesting one is Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh, hired December 12th of 2015. There have been rumblings at certain points in time about whether or not they might need to make a change behind the bench. Now, none of it's ever come from anybody associated with the team. It's normally rumblings, whether it's media, whether it's just fans and this kind of thing. But the question becomes one of how long with Sullivan behind the bench, how long does he get? If Pittsburgh has a rough start with all the veterans on long-term extensions, could Sullivan find himself in trouble? He's been there almost 7 years. It's a very long time to be coach. And at some point in time, it is possible that Ron Hextall looks and says, you know what, we need to make a change behind the bench, get a new voice there, that whole thing. So Sullivan should be safe, but a slow start could change things. John Cooper, March 25th of 2013, hired by Tampa Bay. Looks like there's a really good chance he's going to have spent at least 10 years behind that bench, because March 25th of next year will be that 10-year mark. And it is remarkable what a difference a couple of Stanley Cups have made. 2019, honestly, I thought that sweep that they suffered at the hands of Columbus had a lot to do with his coaching too. I thought the team showed no signs of urgency until they were down in Game 4. And I thought Cooper seemed kind of casual about it as well. But 2020, they definitely came out a lot of fire, and they won it. And then they won it again in 2021. John Cooper's really safe. I'd be absolutely shocked if anything happened with Tampa Bay's coaching. So I think most coaches in the National Hockey League right now are pretty safe. That being said, things can change fast. We have 2 coaches that were hired in 2022, right? They're sticking around, and then you've got all of these coaches here that were hired in the offseason. So it's a lot. We'll see who survives this season. Let me know in the comment section below which coaches you think might be on the hot seat this year. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.